Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures. I'm excited about today's episode with Alice Crisci. She and I talk about a whole variety of topics, including her journey as an entrepreneur, the company that she is building and growing, how to stay sane as an entrepreneur, and much more. But first, a quick note from one of our sponsors that makes this show possible. And in full disclosure, I am an operator investor in this company, and it's Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive customized coaching for you and your team as you're building your new venture. And so it's often difficult for entrepreneurs to kind of know what questions to ask or know where to go operationally next in order to figure out how to ideate, validate, and create and grow and ultimately fund your company. And so Startup Rocket has a variety of frameworks that will help you be maximally efficient with your operations. And in fact, I appreciate Alice even refers to Startup Rocket at one point in this episode, which is really helpful, and I appreciate that a ton. So if you are listening to this show, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com, and there you'll see more extensive show notes to the things that we talk about today. And if you're watching, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Alice Crisci. All right, Alice, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Will. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm excited for this conversation. Would you mind just starting to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, kind of the origin story of what you're up to here?
Sure can. So I am Alice Crisci. I am creator of FertilityAnswers app and the company MedAnswers. But before I got into healthcare, I was a business owner. I think I had my first company, a little marketing consulting firm when I was in high school. And, it was the early days of graphic design on Mac computers. And I always knew that I didn't want to study business. I wanted to study mass communications. So really, I came out of college with a media arts and design background, but I was still having my own little consulting companies through college, running the ad department of the high school newspaper. Built my first selling system when I was in high school, and then turned that into a consulting company in my 20s, was part of an awesome team. We sold it. And then I was on to my next consulting gig when I was diagnosed with cancer at 31. And that was the big pivot and the big turning point in my life. It wasn't the cancer that I was mostly scared about. It was actually the prospect of being left infertile. I was very busy building my career, and I was in a relationship at the time, but I wasn't really focused on marriage. I thought I had plenty of time for marriage and family to come later. And then all of a sudden, a healthcare crisis made the prospect of not getting to live the life I imagined. It was threatened. It was daunting. And immediately I knew I will do whatever it takes to protect that vision I have of my future as a mom. So I was thrust into the fertility preservation conversation before egg freezing was a nationwide conversation, before Apple and Facebook provided egg freezing benefits for their employees. And the reason that that's so important is because it really, 13 years ago, was the seed that was planted but took about 8 years to sprout into the company MedAnswers. So I successfully preserved my fertility. I picked out an anonymous egg donor back then because egg freezing was considered experimental. I stored those embryos for 5 years before doing an embryo transfer. So my now 7-year-old was a day 2 frozen embryo for 5 years. And he is a super bright, super funny, super loving, Minecraft obsessed 7-year-old. And it's just wild to think about his growth as a human, the cellular division that can lead to a human suspended in time, cryopreserved. To me, no matter how many times I tell the story, that part is just still mind-blowing. But I started an oncofertility charity right away before I even underwent surgery. And I did that because there was such a huge lack of information. There was a lack of resources. I had to put a $20,000 expense on a credit card when I was already facing exorbitant expenses to go through cancer treatment, because this is also pre-ACA days where people maxed out their insurance and then had millions of dollars in bills for paying for cancer treatment. It was a time when pre-existing conditions, would lock you out from even being insured. So it was a scary time. And I was already paying like $650 a month in premiums. And I still had about $80,000 in medical debt that very first year of things that just weren't covered. So I went to work on insurance to make sure that fertility preservation was a covered benefit. And I went to work on setting up a reduced fee egg freezing network so that the doctors, at least in California, would conduct their services at $3,000 instead of $10,000 or $12,000. Right. And I did that for a few years while recovering. That led me to consulting projects in the space. That led me to helping other startups in the world of reproductive medicine. It led me to meeting a world-renowned reproductive geneticist named Santiago Munet, who was the one whose company did the genetic testing of my embryos. And it kind of dawned on us with the advent of Facebook groups, and the spread of misinformation was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I was finding myself, texting all these providers that I knew to have them answer questions that were popping up on Facebook groups. And these folks would get back to me in 15 minutes. And it kind of dawned on me one day, probably in the shower or something, as like all the best ideas come, that why can't I create an environment where instead of these patients connecting with each other and giving each other bad medical advice, they can actually just ask their anonymous question in this private, protected, HIPAA compliant environment and have my same network answer their question. And that was the advent of this concept of MedAnswers. And we called the company MedAnswers that from the beginning and not FertilityAnswers because we always knew we wanted to be broader than fertility. We knew that there were multiple health issues facing people of reproductive age. We knew that I'd have to go into oncology answers at some point just to fulfill that part of the passion. And that was the genesis. But it took kind of 8 years of going through my own back-to-back health crises, if you consider both, cancer and infertility. And then, of course, serving patients in the way that I was serving them for, I think, the genesis of the idea to even sprout. And I just knew I finally had the right timing with a product-based company.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's been inspiring to watch you do your thing. And I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and the energy that you bring to your game is inspirational to many. So I'd love to go back to the earlier years. You're in high school, you're an entrepreneur, you're a company, you're selling services. What sort of things were you learning as an entrepreneur? Like, where did that kernel of entrepreneurship come from, and what were those early learnings?
Well, I think the reality is, entrepreneurship it's kind of genetic. We have to isolate like the genes that actually, make somebody be like, I have to do this on my own. Now, I do say, that there are things in my history. My father worked for the government. So he was always capped at a salary. And there were times when he was furloughed, right? There were times when we were in budget crisis in the country and he was home for a month and wasn't getting paid. And that kind of impact on our family made a significant difference in my life because I always wanted to be the creator of my own destiny and not sort of a clock in, clock out, have a lot of boundaries around what I can create and how I can create it and how I can generate wealth. I just saw the impact of his service, and it was an incredible service and something that I'm so honored and proud of him that he served, our country as a civilian in the way that he did. And that was after he did a couple years in the Navy. And, and it was a white collar job, but it had such a ceiling, and I wanted a life that didn't have a ceiling. That was my biggest thing. And even as a woman, right, like they talked about breaking the glass ceiling, I'm like, I don't see a ceiling. There's just no ceiling for me. There never has been. I didn't butt up against, men treating me poorly. I have amazing male business partners throughout my life. And in high school, though, it was my journalism advisor, Mrs. Carnes, who tasked me with creating a selling system because she saw what I was able to do very naturally and very successfully. And she said, your end of year assignment is to teach all 75 journalism students how to sell.
Nice.
And I was like, oh man, I don't know how to do that. And so I just documented what I would do when I got on the phone, what I would do after I was on the phone. And this is before email. So everything was a very manual experience in sales, where it was picking up a phone that had a cord connected to it. We didn't even have speakerphone on that phone in the classroom. It was having to show up at the mall and visit these managers at these little mom and pop, shops that I was selling ads to. But I did it. I created my first selling system. She gave me an A+ on it. I taught these other students how to do it. Some of them turned into revenue generators. Some of them did not. And then, I just followed that up when I went to college. Our high school newspaper was the richest paper in the country.
Ooh.
And we ended up buying the most state-of-the-art equipment because of it. And then the thing that made us so mad is that the principal of the school started dipping into our budget because we were doing better probably than the football boosters.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't hear that story too often. So yeah, I mean the best that's incredible. Yeah, I mean the best founders we work with they're just naturally in sales with regard to that process. So maybe talk about that a little bit. What is it about? What did you end up teaching those 75 journalism students in terms of principally how you go about doing your thing?
Ooh, boy, I probably have that first selling system somewhere in a bin in the garage. I should pull it out and actually look at it.
Yeah.
I think that there are some basics, right? I think it's rapport building that came naturally to me. I think what surprises most people about me is that I actually feel I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert, but I am a gregarious introvert, if that is such a thing.
Sure.
But I really, really love connecting with people. And the introvert in me loves the one-on-one connection. And so I think that the first thing that I started to document or look at why were people willing to talk to me? And it was an immediate rapport building. How do you do that? How do you bring that enthusiasm where in the first 15 seconds of someone hearing the quality of your voice, I would always stand up when I would be on the phone. I would never sit down and do my job. I didn't sit down and do my job in college, not in high school. There was something innate, and look at me now, I'm standing up. I stand all day long to do my job while I talk to people, because you bring the energy in your entire body, and then people feel that over the phone. They sense that when you have just a quick couple seconds to get them to say, yes, I'm willing to talk to you. And then there's always is now a good time? I'm only going to take up a couple minutes of your time. Is now good? Or do you want me to call you back in a little bit? Giving people permission to say hey, I do want to talk to you, but now might not be the perfect time. And then I think I walked them through the path of it's always best to ask questions rather than pitch anything. So it's great to tee up what the value proposition is of the context of the conversation and then just dive into asking questions. People don't like to be sold, but they love, love, love to buy. And the only way to get people to do what they're naturally inclined to do, which is buy, is to ask them a number of questions. And later on in life, I was able to identify language around that process. What is it about that? And when you ask great questions, people perceive the asker as the expert, not the answerer.
That's good. That's good. So how then was sales part of your journey in your 20s? How was sales part of that, part of your career, and kind of how did you see yourself growing professionally in that season?
Well, in college, so I knew I was, sales came easily, and I knew I could always make money in sales. And I knew that was a great skill set to have because you're always selling something, yourself, your product, your service, whatever it might be, your ideas. So I sold books door to door in college, 80 hours a week in my summer vacation. I, with a number of other students who are still some of my best friends in life, did the craziest summer job, while my friends back home were lifeguards and partying and we were working our butts off. And it was incredible character building. It was hard. You would spend 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. knocking on doors and, 3 sales a day. You needed 80. I learned the value of metrics from that experience. You have to hit the 80 doors. Even if you are terrible, you have to hit the 80 doors and open up your book to get a demo in. You need 10 demos a day out of the 80 to find your 3 sales. I had a shorter summer the first summer because I had to get back to the newspaper to do my job there. And I still made the top 10% of the company in that first summer. It was, I think, mental toughness building that I really needed. Some days, and this is for men and women. I mean, I was in your neck of the woods, really. My first summer was in the Pacific Northwest.
Mm.
I was running through hailstorms to make those 80 door knocks, and people were predominantly mostly nice, but then sometimes they were mean. And you have to kind of learn to let that roll off. It was an emotional roller coaster because it was just so hard and lonely, because you were doing it by yourself the whole day. Sometimes you'd get to follow a manager or have somebody follow you. And those were great days because you were door knocking with somebody else. But I learned to persevere. I learned to persevere through doubt, through hail, pummeling my head, through rainstorms, through lightning, through my transmission falling out of the car, drove across country 3 times for those summers. And I think it definitely built the fabric of even what it took to get through cancer.
So that journey of coming through cancer and it sounds like you got very active with your cancer recovery and advocacy work. What was the journey of starting then the company that you're up to now? Like, when did you know that, like, oh, this is a business, I'm going to get after it? What was that process like for you?
Well, since I'd already started a couple businesses and started the charity, I was good at starting things.
Mm.
I think I do have a skill set, or kind of my superpower is being catalytic.
Mm.
And so when the idea popped, I couldn't look away. It was the same with the Onco-Fertility charity. I walked out of the fertility clinic and I turned to my friend and I said, this must be why I got cancer. I'm called to start this charity. I'm called to serve, the next generation of people with this. And being of service kind of was the thing that helped me cope, having an attitude of gratitude, making sure that it wasn't all about me, that it was really about contributing to the community around me that was also being impacted. I used to write thank you notes during chemo sessions so I wouldn't focus on such a negative, daunting experience.
Mm.
And because you're sitting there for 6 hours getting poison dripped into your bloodstream. And so when I had the idea, it was a similar obsession. When you have a calling, it becomes an obsession. You can't not do it. You can't look away. You're like, I built out all the ideas, and I remember it happened in April of 2016. I was already in business with Santi Monet, but we were doing something else that we were kind of passionate about, but not the same level of obsession.
Mm.
And we were trying to figure out this lab product, this at-home testing product, and it wasn't working. And we were kind of doing it as like a hobby. Then this idea hit. And we built all the features on like one email thread that I wish I still had because it was an old email account. I don't have access to it now. And we built out like all the features over email. And then from April to August, I kind of put the structure around the idea and what it could look like. And I finally pitched somebody in August and got my first $50,000 check. I never raised money before. All my other companies were service companies. And when I got cancer, I said, I can't do another service company because if you're the one that's delivering the service and you get sick, you go bankrupt because there's nobody else to do your job for you. And I said, I'm never doing that kind of business again. I have to do a product company. Now, ironically, my product company is service. I still haven't been able to get away from the service mindedness, but working with folks like you and some other phenomenal people, we're able to productize those services so that it's scalable far beyond me.
Yeah. Yeah. So the original pitch back then to get your first $50,000 check, what was that pitch? I mean, in a nutshell, what gripped that investor?
Oh my gosh. I think he loved the idea that I was connecting consumers directly to people that they normally would have to spend $350 to $1,500 to get access to.
Mm.
So he was compelled by this idea of, you're right, we have a mass market problem in getting fertility access. There is no direct-to-consumer marketing channel for people to access fertility information, education, or the specialists themselves. So out of the millions of people who need access to them, there's only about 1% of people who actually get the access, who actually go through treatment. So there's so many barriers. And my approach to the barriers is the first piece needs to be getting a personal question answered. That's a simple entry point.
So for those not familiar, talk a little bit about the product. So the way that you're addressing the problem. So the problem obviously is people are wrestling, struggling with fertility issues, have a zillion questions. You Google Dr. Google, and you get scary and confusing information.
Yeah.
And so tell us about what did you create specifically to help this problem?
For those of you who know Quora, the idea was sort of marrying Quora, but with experts to directly to consumers. So we believe strongly in privacy and anonymity because there are, it's a very personal thing when you're going through fertility struggles. There's a lot of cultural barriers that create shame around the conversation, and we wanted to avoid all that. So we engage an anonymous user. They fill out a health profile in exchange for asking a network, a multidisciplinary network of over 15 different types of professionals, all have to be board certified in something, their personal question. And because these experts can see an anonymous health profile, they're able to answer the question with utter relevance. How you answer the same question for somebody who's 24 is very different than how you answer for somebody who's 44. You know, at 24, your path to success can look very, very different than somebody who's 44 and needs to go straight into, you know, the most aggressive treatment path. So that core mechanism is at the heart of the initial engagement, is just getting people access to ask their question of somebody who's qualified to answer it. So over 15,000 answers we believe are all clinically and scientifically validated because of who's answering it. We have an upvoting mechanism, so those same professionals can upvote each other's answer. You might get more than one answer. Where else can you turn in healthcare where you can easily get second and third and fourth, maybe even 8 inputs from the same level of professional? There isn't anywhere in healthcare that you can get that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I even in entrepreneurship, right? If I go on Reddit or Quora or something, and somebody asks a question, I always want more context.
Around who's answering it. Yeah.
I always want, so yeah, to be able to provide your experts anonymously the proper information so that they can answer in a way that's genuinely helpful. I mean, that's incredible. Like, what's an example of the type of information that these experts would have in order to customize their answers to the people asking?
Some basic things are going to be gender identification, age, marriage status, any existing diagnoses related to fertility, things like PCOS or endometriosis. Height and weight is really important. There's such an obesity epidemic, and most people truly don't know and aren't having conversations with their primary care doctors, the weight and infertility connection. And that goes for men and women. That we also allow people to let us know if they have any current labs. And then in the question themselves, people are so specific. So if somebody's just had an egg retrieval, they'll tell us, I've had 20 eggs retrieved. My E2 was this during the retrieval. My husband's sperm count is this, and his motility is that, and his morphology is this. So we actually are collecting data kind of in 2 ways. One is just the health profile itself, and the other is in the question itself. And it's a rich amount of information.
Wow, that's amazing. So you launched this when?
We launched, so I got my first little bit of money in August of 2016, got my next bit of money in January of 2017 to build the product. So I prototyped with my first $50K check. And then we did a 6-month build and released on June 24th, 2017.
Wow.
We go fast.
So maybe let's pause and do a little education session, because I'd imagine people listening in may be struggling with infertility right now and just wondering, where do you start, right? So let's assume somebody's listening in and they're just at the point where it's like, maybe I should reach out to somebody, maybe I should ask a couple questions. How do you typically guide somebody who's just new to the process? Where do you start?
My biggest frustration in our country right now is that fertility consults, telehealth consults, are usually excluded from state telehealth laws. And so people aren't actually getting this specialty consult. So our first point of advocacy with our users and with the patients that we connect with is, you have every right to access a specialty consult. If you have a bum knee, your primary care doctor is going to refer you to an orthopedist and your insurance is going to cover it. If you have high cholesterol or high blood pressure, you're going to get referred to a cardiologist. Certainly your primary care doctor or an OB/GYN is not going to treat you for cancer, and they would refer you to an oncologist. So why is it that this is the one disease area recognized as a disease by the CDC, recognized as a disease by the World Health Organization, in which we exclude even the consult as a covered insurance benefit, either by telemedicine or in person? So we know that we need to solve that problem. But what we do is we advocate for people getting into the right place. Now, there is a huge volume of patients of reproductive age who are on state insurance programs. So we know we have to solve this with Medicaid in particular, because it's incredibly unfair. And oftentimes infertility is the output of other health conditions going on. So take PCOS as a for instance. PCOS is a very common condition in people of reproductive age, but it's a metabolic disorder, which means it's not going away. It's going to follow you for the rest of life. You're at high risk for insulin resistance, high risk for high cholesterol, high risk for difficulty losing weight. So there's all kinds of compounding health conditions. And the insurance companies have historically taken kind of a myopic view of, well, we're not going to cover infertility treatment. Therefore, we're not going to cover even the consult. And that is just absolutely not proper health coverage. That's not proper health care. To me, that's a huge travesty. There's a wide range of infertility treatment, some of which might include lifestyle changes. That if you have the proper consultation, the proper diagnostic workup, then you can be an empowered individual, and we can help people with our mission, which is help 1 million healthy babies be born to healthy parents. Now, some people, their infertility is very pure. They have a tubal issue, a tubal blockage that you cannot unblock. A man might be born with a genetic predisposition to non-obstructive azoospermia, meaning he just doesn't have sperm count that is high enough in ejaculation to produce a fertilized egg. And so there are, for both men and women, there's low invasive things that we can do with those types of conditions, and there's very invasive things we can do with those types of conditions, and kind of everything in between. But the earlier that we intervene on what really is leading to someone's struggle to conceive, then the faster and the lower tech that we can be in solving their problem. Another example of that is gut dysbiosis. We work with researchers who have discovered the connection between gut dysbiosis, microbiome imbalances, and unexplained infertility. And their solution is compelling and incredible. They have very high success rates for people pre-IVF when they just do a custom probiotic and a custom nutraceutical. They solve the gut dysbiosis, they put the gut back in balance, and the impact to their reproductive health is incredible. Where 14 out of 15 patients that were pre-IVF got pregnant. Even in difficult to conceive IVF patients, they've had more success than the IVF world has.
So since we're on the education part of things, 3 things that you've mentioned: PCOS, a metabolic syndrome, and your nutraceuticals. So let's take one what is PCOS?
PCOS is polycystic ovary syndrome. It's a metabolic disorder. Both men and women can be genetic carriers of this, but there are also genetics only account for about 30% of symptoms, whereas lifestyle can contribute about 70% of symptoms or health considerations like high cholesterol. So why that's important is we believe it's important for people to know what their genetics are, but we also believe it's important for them to know what the impact of lifestyle changes is on their genetics, which is also called epigenetics, just to empower people to give back that autonomy that says, you actually can do something about this. This is not a life sentence. You can alter this path. If you feel like time is against you and you don't have time to make all those lifestyle changes, or you feel like you can't stick to those lifestyle changes, whether it be daily exercise or cutting out carbs or reducing alcohol, stopping to smoke marijuana. There's some other things that you can do to have a healthy baby, sure. But we certainly advocate for people to make those lifestyle changes so that they're bringing healthy babies into a healthy environment.
And so PCOS. And so when you say it's a metabolic disorder, for those that aren't familiar with the lingo, what is a metabolic disorder? What does that even mean?
Well, so in this case, what it means is, um, you you're putting me on the spot here. That's a very scientific. What does that actually mean? I throw around that term all the time. Nobody said it. It's like, what does that really mean? Well, so there's a few things about PCOS. I mean, metabolic disorder means like something on your metabolic pathway, from the pituitary gland all the way through the hormone production to the result of the hormones being imbalanced and talking productively to each other, that would produce healthy eggs every single month. So since that pathway gets disturbed, and sometimes it's disturbed in concert with like insulin resistance, and then what ends up happening is people won't release an egg every month, and ovulation, that's called. In some cases, irregular periods, which you can have ovulation sometimes, the irregular periods, but mostly irregular periods means that you're probably not ovulating. So that could mean that you don't bleed for 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden you have a bleed. Women who have this condition, their LH levels, their luteinizing hormone level, is all over the place all month. So if they're tracking whether or not they're ovulating, or tracking whether they get an LH surge, which is supposed to be indicative of a fertile window, indicative of an egg about to be released, they get very confused because it's not telling them the right piece of information. So they need to also measure their progesterone, because the only way you know if you've released an egg is if you actually have elevated progesterone. So we've partnered with companies who have kits like that, who can tell them if they have elevated progesterone. I'll stop there. Some of the symptoms, though, that people who have PCOS is a very difficult condition to properly diagnose, because it's kind of a visual diagnosis. We don't have like a singular blood test. There's some things like people with very high anti-Müllerian hormone levels, high AMH, because people with PCOS tend to have a lot more follicles than other people. Sometimes they have cysts on their ovaries. Sometimes they have cystic acne, even down their neck. Sometimes they have hair growth on their face. And so it's a difficult thing, because we don't have a really good singular diagnostic tool.
So you've become, it sounds like, very much an expert in the fertility space, to say the least. And what's interesting is that because you're not a practicing healthcare provider, you probably have certain liberties that the experts that you work with don't have. Can you talk a little bit about that? And because with telehealth and all the medicine the online type of things, it's always a little bit of a tricky dance there. How have you navigated that with your different experts that you work with?
That's actually a really great question, and probably the most fun part about my job, because I'm a patient advocate, right? So I'm advocating for the person in front of me, or the people in front of me, to get access to the things that I think they need. And because I don't have just one point of view from like the reproductive endocrinologist perspective, I've got the naturopathic MD, I've got the microbiome people, I'm being educated by literally like the most holistic approach. I can bring that, hey, maybe you want to look into this, maybe you want to look into that, without being that medical expert, just giving people the power and the empowerment to ask the right questions, but also getting those experts sometimes to open their own mind and hearts to it. So for instance, when I'm interviewing our key opinion leaders on an Instagram Live, or I'm interviewing them on a Facebook Live or a Zoom on behalf of the patients, I can ask those probing questions that the patients might be afraid to ask their own doctor. And sometimes users don't know what question to even ask. And sometimes we can bring that perspective to them. Like, we can kind of look in between the lines and say, we know what you should be asking. And sometimes the provider's scared to bring up certain things too. Sometimes the providers are afraid to bring up weight as the issue. They're afraid that they're going to push somebody away. They're afraid to be shaming. So I think kind of for all parties involved, we're a communication bridge. And I do think that over time, we are going to help providers communicate as patient advocates to their patients, and create safer spaces for patients to ask tough questions, and for them to have tough conversations. Some people are really naturally gifted at it. Some people are very naturally gifted at being super empathetic, bringing up very difficult things, and they become, truly like lifelong positive impact on the patients that they're serving. Other people are abysmally terrible at it. They just don't have a good, whether it's bedside manner or they approach things in such a aggressive manner, like you must lose weight and that's it. That can be very off-putting for an American patient. It might work in a different culture, but what we've seen is that it can be very off-putting here. So I think that we're able to really, we have the freedom to help everybody communicate in a more powerful manner, a little bit more empowering, more empathy, more support. So I think that's kind of one of the areas that is so compelling. And I think when it comes to telemedicine and telehealth, there's a lot of great tools out there to give people access to transaction. We're giving people access to a relationship, even though we don't facilitate a provider-patient relationship in the platform because we keep patients anonymized. They still have a relationship with us. Yeah. So there is ongoing engagement. I mean, our average user engages in the platform over 200,000 times over the course of, the year that they're with us or the 2 years that they're with us. It's an incredible amount of times that they interact with us. And that doesn't include how they interact with us in our Instagram community. So I think that's a huge difference, right? Because you might have a 15-minute conversation in a telemedicine visit with somebody about some generalized thing you have, but where are you checking in on a regular basis with ongoing questions, right? And building your own Q&A history. When I save things that I've even asked, these are legitimate questions I'm asking about my own reproductive path forward because I have frozen embryos left and I'm getting old. So I want to know when I should do my next transfer and what I need to be doing to make sure that I have a healthy pregnancy at, my ripe old age. And so when I go to ask those questions, now I have all this incredible saved content. I have a psychologist who gave me the most incredible advice about genetic testing of my son, who's donor conceived. So I have a huge, answer from a psychologist in our platform, and she doesn't know that I asked the question. I'm the one that recruited her into the platform, but she doesn't know that it was my question that she answered, right? Because I was anonymous to her.
Right.
And it was a game changer for me and how I kind of viewed, his choices in life and his autonomy in understanding a side of his DNA that is not mine.
So a question I get all the time from new entrepreneurs when they have an idea in their head and they're obsessed with it, like you were, and they're wondering how to get started, right? They're wondering how to get started, and also how do they know if it's validated or not? So for you in this venture, how did you get started, and how did you know whether that you were really onto something?
I mean, I think they should go to your website, the startup website first. Had I had that, it structures your idea in such a compelling way that you get to workshop it along the way. So, I mean, there's a couple of tools, that I use. One is just the first investor deck to flesh out the story and to flesh out the idea, and I think that it is, the more you talk about your idea, people get really afraid to talk about their idea because they're like, oh, I don't want anybody to take my idea. And I take the exact opposite view because everybody can have ideas, but there are fewer and fewer people who can execute successfully against them. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with if somebody else had done my idea first, that would have been far easier for me to just do something better against how they executed. Mm. I'm never scared about that competition.
Right.
Because of that, it's always easier to just do something that somebody else did a little bit better, and find your positioning that way. When you're the first to the table, you think that that's awesome and great, but sometimes it's harder. Right. Sometimes it's harder when there's no direct competitors, which was our experience. But I think that there are tools out there that you have to engage to help you flesh out your idea. I think that it's very wise in the early stages to write a full and complete business plan, write an executive summary, because the pithier that you can talk about it, the easier it's going to be to put together an investor deck. Mm-hmm. I think that the way you tell your story is going to change. I mean, I probably have 800, not kidding, versions of my investor deck since 2016. If it's a product, you've got to prototype it. You got to sketch out, and put all over your wall by hand drawn pictures of how this is going to work. You got to make your user flows. I remember the first time I workshopped it, we had these big Post-it notes and they covered the entire wall, and it was our first user pathways of everything. I still have those pictures somewhere. I probably should send them to you. And, So I think you have to utilize the tools that exist out there to help you structure and frame your idea. And then you have to go get feedback about it, and you got to be really coachable about it. Get feedback. What am I missing? What are my blind spots? Am I onto something? And then do your competitive research. Are there people already doing it? Is there a competitive space? Do you find a good spot where, you fit in, that it's like very obvious where you differentiate? One of your colleagues, when he heard my idea, he said, this is one of those ideas where you go, why the heck didn't somebody else think of this?
Right.
And there's been like a lot of different versions of, a lot of AI, a lot of machine learning when you have symptoms and people want to give you a diagnosis back. But I think we're missing human to human connection in this world. I mean, you saw that most glaring last year in the pandemic, and it's bled over into this year. Like, our brand is so human, and it is about fostering human to human connections, but making it efficient, and help, like, creating support tools so that people can rapidly be contributors to each other.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, all right. So you had a vision for creating this product to bring the human element, to bring experts in so that people can anonymously get very personalized answers from experts. You get a product built, you kind of have it all the user flows and everything. Then what? How do you market this? How do you get people to actually use it? I mean, this is the question. This is the question entrepreneurs have. They can go into their basement or whatever and crank out a product and assume that the world's going to know about it. But how did you go about getting the world knowing about it? What was the early marketing like?
I mean, for us, we did all video-based paid ads, and we relied on paid channels. When we first went to run Facebook ads, all video-based, very compelling stories, emotive storytelling, inspirational storytelling, kind of about how we wanted to solve people's fertility challenges, how we wanted to be of service to them. And we had a super low customer acquisition cost. I mean, like $1.27.
Oh, wow.
So with a tiny bit of capital, we were able to get that first 100 users and the first 1,000, and we relied on those paid channels. Now, some folks do great on Product Hunt and they invest their time there, right? Some people do great on SEO and organic. We've never done any of it. We overly relied on paid channels, which definitely is a point of failure for us, but we still managed to squeak out 61,000 users, and like our big growth year was like 4,000%, growth. We did apply to an accelerator. I think every entrepreneur would benefit from being in an accelerator of some kind. I think that the network you make and the rapid path forward is very helpful. Yeah. It doesn't have to be even a big name one. It could be one like in your city. Sure. Cities and governments have a lot of them too. Could be virtual. It doesn't have to be Y Combinator. The accelerator I joined is a genetic-based accelerator because we wanted to be one of the first digital health companies to integrate genetics, knowing that the future of personalized medicine is rooted in genetics. So we wanted to be at the forefront of that for infertility because there was no affordable direct-to-consumer fertility test available to help people understand that connection. So, we do, that is something that we built very early and integrated so that we, A, would have the data for our users and B, just have that kind of empowering conversation with them of like, no, there really are lifestyle changes that you can adopt that would help optimize your outcomes, whether you need invasive treatment like IVF or non-invasive treatment.
So back to our education wing of things. What on earth is epigenetics, and why should people think twice about smoking pot when you're trying to get pregnant?
So that's a great conversation. So Avrio is the expert in the epigenetics of CBD and THC. So this is a partner of ours, and what we've been inundated with the last couple of decades is really maybe even longer, maybe 3 decades. Because I remember Clinton's inauguration I went to when I was in high school. I think the second inauguration, there were I was wearing pot leaves around my neck. I didn't know anything about pot in high school, but there was this advocacy group that was putting every pot lays on everybody. And so we were all walking around with our little pot leaves around our neck, so it's been decades, right, of the promotional benefits of CBD and THC. And, there was a wave of legalization happening. Well, the unfortunate thing is those benefits actually do come at a cost to reproductive health. And I'm having a conversation with the founder of epigenetics, and on Instagram, so your listeners could find this on eventually on YouTube and all kinds of channels, about, well, are there different forms that are not what we would call gonadotoxic? So there are a number of genes that your lifestyle choices turn on or off, and then those genes impact your reproductive health. So what we want to do is not turn on the bad ones that would lead to ovulation issues, egg quality issues, sperm issues. Sperm production issues is a big one, impacted by smoking marijuana. And the research is really compelling, but it's really difficult for my users to hear that, who have found incredible benefits for anxiety and depression, sleep quality by, either smoking or ingesting these products, or, wearing them on their skin, or, pain relief. And so we're having, these important discussions and looking at this important research so that users understand, what do I do? Because the thing about epigenetics is that you can counteract it, right? So that's why genetic testing and epigenetic testing is not a life sentence. It's empowering to know this information because you can proactively make a difference. Even if you're genetically predisposed to high cholesterol or high blood pressure, exercise has a positive impact on whether that gene accelerates your high cholesterol or stays kind of quiet, let's say. So these are things that we're educating our users on. We're bringing incredible content, and then we're giving them an expert in the app to ask follow-up questions, to give them an open forum, a safe, anonymous open forum, to have the dialogue.
So then advice for entrepreneurs, maybe, and maybe even for yourself, if you were to go back in time, you said you relied a lot on paid channels for customer acquisition. What would you have done differently? And what, entrepreneurs starting out now, how would you maybe advise them to think about their go-to-market and growth strategy differently?
Data architecture. Have the right data architecture set up for scalable marketing from day one. Because once it's set up once, you can just let it do its thing, and across all algorithms. You've got to enable the algorithms to do their job for you. And I think that's, if there's one thing that I would do different, I think I would have invested in 2017, but I didn't know to do that. I didn't even know what data architecture was from a marketing perspective. I knew what SEO was conceptually. I knew that I was a good brand builder. I knew paid channels. But I think that if you have the right overarching data architecture around your marketing engine, and the right data architecture through your product or through your website, whatever it might be, if you're creating an app, then everything talks to each other, and then you get the right data out to then make really important decisions about what's next. You build your first product, and I will say, for people who are building a product, get the MVP out there as fast as possible, because you have your perspective and you have your ideas, but until you get it in the hands of users, you just won't know until they start using it if your idea was good at all. I mean, there are a number of features that we've thrown away because they didn't land, So that's probably the best piece of advice I got from an investor that I chased and chased and chased, and he never invested in the company, but he gave me the best piece of advice. He said, you got to get it out there. Stop trying to make it perfect. Stop trying to make a product 1.0. And I've seen this with company after company after company. Yeah. They're trying to make a product 1.0, and it's like, you'll never have product 1.0. You just have a different MVP version of what you already have. And you just MVP every feature, MVP every new idea. You just keep MVPing everything. And that's a discipline that we adopted. We did adopt that discipline from day one.
So data architecture, getting the right information at the right time and to the right stakeholders in the business so you can make meaningful decisions about what to do next, for sure. But for those that are considering where to put spend, right? Where to put human resource and time, and where to put spend. Sounds like you successfully put a bunch of money into paid advertising to acquire customers.
We put a little bit of money.
Okay.
So, so I think you have to remember that like most apps never get 10,000 users to use their app, right? Let alone 50,000, let alone 61,000. And so, I think that it's important in sort of the business planning and kind of the trajectory people are looking at to what does that pathway look like? Because when you use paid channels, you can have 100 users that you've got from that paid channel that becomes your first lookalike audience. But then once it's 600, it's a stronger lookalike audience. Once it's 1,000, it's even stronger, right? So there's milestones that you have to hit. I didn't want, if my product was going to fail, I didn't want to waste 5,000 users on a failed product. So I was okay with kind of small incremental growth, looking at their behavior. What do we need to change? What's broken? What's buggy? Let's fix it, right? Before spending on then the next like 3,000 spent. So we were spending very small amounts of money from launch in June 2017, truly even to like October 2018. I went from like 100 or new users to 3,000, and I was so excited about 3,000. And then I had rapid growth because I could spend properly, once I raised more money from October 2018 to October 2019, it was like huge growth.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. So then for the entrepreneurs that are building a company and are thinking about the dance between raising money, figuring out your product, figuring out your team, making sure that you're making your customers happy. It's often not talked enough about in the startup industry around emotional health. But how do you stay sane? How do you stay sane in juggling all the hats and I don't know if you have words for the entrepreneurs listening in that are feeling overwhelmed, but there's the collective, especially in the pandemic, there's this collective like, okay, breathe. What tools and systems or things have you been thinking around in this conversation?
I think this doesn't just apply to entrepreneurs. I think this just applies to every human. Self-care is the most important thing, and nothing in the company is more important than self-care. It took me a while to really adopt this. And in the beginning, because I was juggling single motherhood with the company. So I basically had 2 little ones that I was nurturing and developing, and I was running on empty. And, whiskey is not self-care in large quantities. The occasional whiskey where you're getting like having a great conversation with somebody in front of the fire, self-care, but not like your whiskey to cope at the end of the day and unwind. That's not self-care. Getting up and doing 20 minutes on the Peloton, self-care, making that agreement with my son. Like I have to work out in order to be a good mom. I have to work out to stay healthy for you, for the company, for everybody. That's self-care. And then I worked myself up to 30 minutes on the Peloton. I added back in a weekly weight, training. The Apple Watch has been a good addition. It tells me to breathe. It also shows me that my heart rate's at 104 in the middle of my workday. And I always say to like every doctor, I'm like, I don't think you understand. I'm working out all day long. I'm sprinting through my day, even when I'm standing still. And I'm like, Apple Watch proved it to me. I have the evidence to tell them I'm actually running, which isn't a good thing. So it does tell you to breathe. I picked up a meditation practice. These things don't take a lot of time. You're already taking a shower. You can meditate in the shower. I don't do great meditating on my own because I have like squirrel brain, runaway train, brain. I start ideating the second I go inward. That's not helpful. So I have to use an app to do it. And if you aren't willing to set aside 10 or 15 minutes in the morning to do it, just do it in the shower. You're already taking a 10-minute shower. So just go ahead and, meditate while you're in the shower. It's like half present, but it's still better than not doing it. So I think those and the nourishment with nutrition, I think for entrepreneurs, because we're going, not having to think about nutrition. So like having a meal delivery plan, like a Whole30 or something nourishing like that is really helpful. I try to meal plan. I know exactly what I'm going to eat for lunch every single day. I fell in love with those little keto soups. I had 2 cups of arugula. Spicy cauliflower is my favorite, but I don't have to think about it. So it takes me 5 minutes to make lunch. I get my homeschooling time with my son while he's eating his lunch. and it's a nourishing time for me, and it is really difficult to context switch all day long between CEO mode and and mom mode. It's hard. There's no doubt about it. Like when I'm exhausted at the end of the day, it's usually because the context switching was really exhausting that day. And the only thing to do to deal with it, to like make your brain more malleable to those types of things is nourishment, in my opinion.
What specifically on the topic of meditation, what apps or what techniques and tools have you used that have been helpful?
So we as a company also adopted a meditation practice together.
Hmm.
We were doing Journey Live, and we had an amazing instructor named Andrew. They have a corporate program, and we were doing that, and voluntary.
Mhm.
Although I've done virtual meditations with the whole company before. I love Unplug. Unplug is a wonderful app because kind of they have things topically. So whether it's a gratitude meditation or an abundance meditation, we will I'll just put it on the Zoom call, and everybody will meditate together. There are people on my team who've never meditated in their life who meditated for the first time by working with us. We leave a lot of space for people to take care of their health. So for me, being an older entrepreneur, I think gave me more maybe confidence in sort of standing up for certain things, like health first, family second, company third.
Mm.
That's not something I would have been comfortable with saying when I was 24.
Mm.
I would have been like, no, you got to make company first. Like your investors are going to want company first. And that is asinine thinking. But when I was 24, I would have bought into that. Right. But it is, our team knows that they can say, I need a mental health day today, and it's safe. Our team knows that they can say, I'm really feeling under the weather. I've had to kick people off of virtual calls that they're in bed. What are they doing joining a call? Just because it's a virtual environment doesn't mean that I want you on the call when you're sick. Go take care of yourself. Like joining a call while sick is not taking care of yourself.
Right.
And I'll ask our teammates to leave. So we have to, that's so much part of it is giving yourself permission to take care of yourself first and foremost. Like that oxygen mask has to go on first. And then, you have to support the whole family to do the same. We have a flexible leave policy. Nobody's ever abused it. And, that's super critical that, we give people space and time to have 3-day weekends or week-long, trips with their family to reconnect with their family. There's a lot of homeschooling families that already work for the company. And then there's some families who had to do Zoom schooling last year, right? And juggle the stress of the pandemic with like helping their kids with Zoom schooling. I can't imagine how difficult that is. I tried one online course with my homeschooler and it was painful. It was so painful.
Right.
So yeah, I think those are my go-to though, Unplug and Journey Live. I love both of them.
That's so important. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. I'll make sure to put links to those in the show notes. So for MedAnswers, then you have FertilityAnswers as your first kind of branch that you're going after. But what is the vision? Where are you heading next? What do you want to accomplish in the next X number of years with your company?
The overarching mission really is healthy babies for healthy families. So if you look at the reproductive age space, it's Gen Z, millennials, and still some of us Gen Xers who are a little bit on the older end of the spectrum. And if you look at all the health conditions that are this multi-generational group of people, 18 to 45 or 18 to 50 is facing, they include big considerations like addiction, migraines, gut dysbiosis, obesity, diabetes, COVID-19, long haulers, people who thought they were otherwise healthy, who are going to have, long-term autoimmune issues or inflammatory issues, allergy, autoimmune things. So we have a multi-vertical product that we need to release just to serve our existing users because they have so many things going on already. And then from there, we can expand that, beyond just the reproductive age user to help their parents or to help them as they age. So menopause answers would be next, and all those health conditions still impacting people who are going through menopause. And then eventually, moving into other specialty healthcare areas like neurology for things like Alzheimer's. So the path forward really is about transforming wellness while somebody's in the most motivating space of their life, because their ultimate dream is being threatened by whatever's going on in their health, like mine was when I was diagnosed with cancer.
Mm.
So our philosophy is, if we can be an intervening tool at what should be the most motivating time of someone's life, because there's a big blockade in front of their dream of family, their dream of biological parenthood or parenthood in general, and we can help them with, access to surrogacy and adoption. If we can help them understand that they actually have the power and the autonomy to help remove that blockade, then we can impact their life forever, which then impacts the offspring's life, which then impacts maybe the grandparents' life, which impacts the next generation and beyond. And to me, that's incredibly exciting.
I just absolutely love the heart and the mission and the vision behind what you're doing. It's I've really enjoyed this conversation. We've hit a lot of different points that I think is really insightful and helpful for those listening or watching this. So, as a final thing, just where can people best find you and about your company online?
I think the two best places is just download the Fertility Answers app on iOS and Android and join our Instagram community at FertilityAnswers_. Those are the two best spots. I'm not doing, when I was doing my onco-fertility charity, I was kind of everywhere. I was publishing on Huffington Post, and I was in the media a lot. I tend to just stick to being of service to our community. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share my story and to serve your listeners. But I tend to not, try to be a big kind of public face, because I like to stay in my lane of no, here I might be the face of the Fertility Answers brand, but there will be a different face for the Addiction Answers brand, and there'll be a different face for the Migraine Answers brand. This is me being of service, and kind of anything that takes me off of the path of serving the community who is trying to achieve parenthood doesn't feel right to me. So I don't tend to do a lot of medium publishing and HuffPo anymore and stuff like that, just because it doesn't feel authentic and kind of the right time for me. So just join me on Instagram and in the app.
All right. Awesome. Well, I'll put links to those. And again, really appreciate your time. This has been very insightful and very enjoyable. Thanks, Alice.
I hope so. Thanks, Will. You're up to so many great things in life.
All right. A couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at ProtoVentures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you and your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.